Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. So as you could probably tell already, I work in human rights field. I don't work in the blockchain sphere, but we see that it is already very relevant in our line of work. We see that the people we work with, stateless people, they're already beginning to use blockchain technology to overcome some of the barriers that they face. But we see a lot of things go wrong. There's a lot of good intention by blockchain actors to do good, to have public good, to have value add, but unfortunately, due to how they're not really familiar with the dynamics of human rights or the contexts, different contexts that they're working in, we see a lot of things go really wrong, and it's a really clear example of how you can pave a hell from good intentions. So this presentation will focus on framing the problem. A lot of people don't even know about some of these big issues that exist in the world. And so substantial amount of time I'll do that, so you'll have a clearer picture of what are the problems that some of the most vulnerable populations in the world face. And then in the latter half of the presentation, I'll also describe how there's already solutions that are not theoretical, that are already in practice, and I will discuss also some challenges to these solutions, but of course I'll also go into some details about some harm that we see on the ground by malicious actors. So let's start covering just framing the problem. So this is something that people don't know about. The World Bank estimates there's at least 1 billion people in the world who don't have any legal identity whatsoever. So in the eyes of the law, they don't exist. In the eyes of the government, they don't exist. And it is a huge issue. Many of these people are children. So if they're born in a country, they're oftentimes not given a birth certificates, they're not given a legal existence. And we would like to say, like, well, the child still exists, right? So if a child is born, we're still going to treat it as a human being and they'll have access to human rights, right? Because human rights are human rights. But that's not how it works. We're all products of our environment, and our environment is the state. So if we're not seen by the state, that child will not have access to any human rights whatsoever. No education, no healthcare, no employment, no marriage, no movement, no documents. And so you can imagine, the kind of problem is. Actually, you don't have to imagine. If you want to experiment, try going about your life without having any legal identity or any documents whatsoever. You're going to find it impossible to do so. So aside from the 1 billion people who don't have any legal identity whatsoever, and by the numbers are also estimates, so it's possible that it's even more than that. We do have on top of that number uncountable millions who have what's called degraded forms of legal identity. So there are people who are like me, who hold non-citizenships or sub-citizenships or alien passports. So their government may actually recognize by fact that they're nationals of the country, but legally, they don't want them to have the same rights. So I'll give you an example from history. Because of many European countries having been colonial powers, when you're a colonial power, you take over a territory, and that territory becomes equal part of your home territory. But do the people on that extension of the territory become equal citizens? Of course not. So you have development of sub-citizenships, and then people think that this is a thing of the past. It's not. So there's millions of people who hold sub-citizenship to this day. I have some examples. This is not a complete list. So the UK has 6 sub-citizenship categories. There's millions of people who hold these sub-citizenship categories. And then when decolonization was happening, UK started to implement laws basically more and more restricting the rights of these sub-citizens. These were basically former colonial subjects that were moved around by the British Empire. And their right to come to the UK was decoupled from their citizenship. So they're British citizens, but they don't have the right to move to the UK. They don't have political rights. They don't have many of the essential rights that actually define citizenship. So they're only citizens in name only. Thus, the term sub-citizens. And then I'll throw in a few more examples. So Estonian and Latvian non-citizens. So Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania were promising to their minorities, if you support the independence from the Soviet Union, you will be given access to equal nationality rights. Only Lithuania fulfilled that promise. Estonia and Latvia created a non-citizenship status. So Latvia, for instance, claims that, well, it's the same thing as citizenship. They have the same rights as citizens. But they do everything in their power to make sure that's not true. So you have very interesting political dynamics with these statuses, and I'll use a few more here. American Samoans are a classical example because US, when it was conquering islands in the Pacific, it didn't want to grant these people the same rights because they were seen as people of other color, and then there was serious racist theories that unfortunately are alive to this day and not going away. But basically, they gave him, they said that these people will be American nationals, but they're not going to be citizens. And to this day, American Samoans have this status where they're not allowed to move to the mainland US, and they're not allowed to vote. They're not allowed a lot of essential rights of citizens. But they're possibly the most privileged stateless people in the world, or sub-citizens, because they actually are, they don't have to pay federal taxes, and they can travel to 119 different countries in the world. So that's actually probably the best you can have as a sub-citizen or as a stateless person. And then, of course, we have Palestinians, Rohingyas, and quite recently Assam. That's the last example I'll cover here. Assam people in India, because of the rise of Hindu nationalism, they're a Muslim minority in India, and then the government of India decided, well, we never liked these people, and we will tell them to prove that they were from India before 1954, I believe. And so it's a way of playing around with legal identification papers. They basically put the onus on these people to prove that they're from India as a way to decouple their right to equal citizenship. So these are just some examples, some of the more prominent ones, but by no means the only ones. So I have some example here from this one is from my colleague of how degraded form of legal IDs look like. This is actually not exactly degraded form of legal identification, but it's something else that the governments sometimes do to oppress certain minority groups. So this is a list of family members of my colleague, and what happens every year in Myanmar, the authorities come to the family house, and if anybody is not present, they cross them out from the list. And from that point on, that person doesn't legally exist. And then they can pretty much do anything with that person because they don't legally exist. And we even have historical cases where courts ruled, well, you can't really harm a stateless person because they don't legally exist. So that's why in 1930s and 1940s in Central Europe, you could pretty much do anything to the minorities. It was all legal, like in Nazi Germany, because you don't legally exist. You don't have any protection. Your only protection that you have is your nationality, because you belong to a state. It's not because you're human. And we still have a long way to go to have international law actually have any enforcement or meaning in terms of being more than just on a piece of paper. So the other ID, it's also from the same colleague. The document on the left here is the special document for permission to move from a town to another town, like just to transit, to move, to have the right to travel. So we're not talking about like outside of the country. So in Israel, there's not Israel, the occupied West Bank, it's the same sort of thing. They issue special papers as a permission for you to move between villages or between towns. So even if you're in your own country, you need to have a right to move, from Prague to Brno or something like that. So these are the kind of IDs that are issued or documents. And then the ID on the right, that's a temporary ID where there's emphasis that this person is not a citizen of Myanmar and does not have the rights of a citizen of Myanmar. But they use these IDs to basically track people and know who they are and come get them whenever they feel like it. And then the next one, you might find this person familiar. It's me. Yeah, I mean, Latvia, when it became independent, it decided not to issue equal nationality papers. It said, don't worry, we're going to create some separate but equal status. And the Latvian government insists that we are nationals. By fact, in Latvian language, there's a term that encompasses us, the minorities from there. So my family is ethnically Latvian-Ukrainian. But yeah, 1/3 of a country all of a sudden found themselves with this kind of legal ID. Now, what's very interesting is that according to the Latvian law and constitutional court, we cannot be called aliens or foreigners because our only legal bond, our only legal connection is to Latvia. We have no other legal connection. But in our primary form of legal identification, they use these terms, contradicting their own law, contradicting their own constitutional court. And we actually, in my line of work, we communicated with the Latvian government and said, like, well, we know this is kind of an awkward issue for you. You know, you don't like the international pressure on this. Could you get rid of these terms because they're not in line with your law or your public statements? And they said, oh, this is something lost in translation. This is the weakness of French and English languages, so we're not going to do anything about it. So it's very interesting how acrobatics are done in language with state actors. And of course, the whole point of it is to avoid accountability. And then the next thing highlighted here is my nationality, XXX. It basically means undefined. So oftentimes it will not even say stateless for stateless people because that will require the state to take accountability and give rights to the stateless person. So oftentimes they have other categorizations as a way to avoid that accountability. So fun fact is that I actually collected all the designations, XXX, XXO, and XXA. XXA basically means that you are officially determined stateless by some state actor, and I was determined stateless in Switzerland. And so it's actually quite mind-boggling to go through all these designations. The last thing I want to point out is, of course, that I was born there. My parents are from Latvia. My mother's side, we don't actually know how far our history extends. Our roots extend in Latvia. More than 100 years for sure, but we don't know. Because during World War I, World War II, a lot of records were not kept safely, and the onus is always on the individual, even if it was the fault of the state to not keep the records. So that's something to keep in mind, actually, for all of us in the room. If something goes wrong, the onus is on you to fix the problem that bureaucracies make. Yes, the last things I want to mention about framing the problem. So the quite essential thing to keep in mind is that proof of identity means access to rights. If you don't have proof of identity, if you don't have such thing as nationality, these things are the gateways to your rights. So without these things, you're nothing. Okay, and that's why for many stateless people in the world, for many people who have the greatest forms of nationality or IDs, it's hell on earth. You know, your life is an extreme difficulty mode. And it's not advisable. Many of these people just give up, or they hope to become refugees, which is very interesting because everybody can understand who refugees are, and it's easier, I think, for people to have access to rights when you're a refugee. So it's actually quite crazy that for many stateless people in the world, or those without IDs, they oftentimes can't leave the countries that are stripping them of their rights. And so if there's a conflict or a war, it's like a golden ticket for these people to become refugees. But of course, it's not going to be easy for them because, again, if they don't have legal IDs, if they get out of the country, the world doesn't exactly welcome them, right? So again, the lessons from 1930s, 40s, and 50s was that the world didn't really welcome these refugees that were forced out of their countries, and actually there were pushbacks back into places like Nazi Germany, where these people all of a sudden ended up being in concentration camps. Although that was not the plan originally, because the plan was to push them out, but the world didn't care to welcome these people. Okay, so another thing that's very important to point out, that none of you own your identity. If you open your passport, doesn't matter what country it's from, it will say that very clearly. The owner of this passport is the government, not you. People don't give it much thought, but that basically means that the government has absolute, total monopoly on issuing legal identity and owning it. You have 0% ownership of your identity proof. So that is all nice as okay, as long as the government is nice and rosy and okay. But no government can guarantee to you what government will come in the future, and what kind of policies or theories they will have, or what kind of hair color do they want you to have, or what kind of race they want you to have, or what kind of political views they want you to have. So we see a lot of people have their legal IDs canceled or degraded, or they become denationalized because they politically dissent. Right now, recent example from Belarus, like in 2020, people took to the streets because they just got fed up with fraudulent elections. And as per usual, government cracked down, 500,000 of these people fled, and the government of Belarus said, we're going to make these people stateless. And they did it in a very clever way. They said, like, okay, if these people want to renew their documents, they have to come back to Belarus. We're going to only do it in Belarus. You can connect the dots what that means, right? And the EU said to its member states, don't allow these people to become undocumented or stateless. But nobody knows about this topic. Nobody really is doing anything about the topic, and the EU member states are not exactly keen to make these people their own citizens, or given permanent residence even. So it's a huge issue to this day. But the key thing is that and I think a lot of these governments, they don't do this even on purpose. They don't do it even necessarily by design. We make it just so easy for them to abuse their powers that they just do it sometimes as a knee-jerk reaction, right? So if you have absolute authority to get rid of your political opposition by just canceling their papers, wouldn't you want to do it? So that's actually a very dangerous lesson that we never seem to learn, is that when you have absolute monopolies or absolute powers, they tend to corrupt quite effectively. And that basically means lack of accountability, and we can expect the same legal frameworks that create these problems to resolve it. And that's, I think, gonna allow me to move into the next point about why we're looking into, oh yes, and then of course, I have even more examples, but I'll just bring up Venezuela here. I've already brought up a couple of these. So in Venezuela, you probably know about the mess going on there, but if you're a journalist or somebody who politically dissents, nowadays you find yourself going to the airport and you have the passport. It's not canceled or taken away. But these people are being told in the airport all of a sudden, oh yeah, your passport got canceled digitally. And we have a serious problem in modern technology being combined with absolute certain powers of state to the point where it creates serious abuse that nobody can have answers for. And so, Venezuela has absolute monopoly to issue documents to its own citizens, and it can cancel them at any point, and now they can do it digitally, and you will not even know about it until it's a surprise to you. And we see this is going to be a more common thing throughout the world, because I think, it's quite of interest for many governments to use new technology in whichever way they want to fulfill the interests that they pursue. And as I made the point already, it's important to keep in mind that the way things are, the onus is always on you whenever something goes wrong, even if it's not malicious. So we have different examples, but I'll bring up one from Ukraine, because parts of Ukraine are now occupied by Russia, and some Ukrainians, they don't have their papers because they had to escape really quickly, or because their building was burned or destroyed. And they're having a difficulty reestablishing their identity or their proof of nationality, because the Ukrainian government is saying, well, the onus is on you to prove who you are. And in order to do that, you have to go, for instance, to archives. But if archives are an occupied territory, what are you going to do? But the government's response is like, well, it's not our problem. It's just our monopoly, but no accountability. So that's a serious issue, and the onus, it's important to keep in mind, is always on us. So why blockchain? Well, we already see solutions as stateless people, as those who lack legal IDs, or have degraded forms of it. We already see it in such things as banking. So if you go to a bank, what do they ask you? Legal IDs, or especially nationality, right? And we have a large-scale project with some of our law firm partners, because we see a lot of shady practices by banks, financial institutions, where they're actually supposed to open up accounts to refugees or exiles or stateless people, but they have so much power to decide who their clients are, they're willing to not open accounts and even violate anti-discrimination regulations and laws, and they have that power. So a lot of refugees, exiles, stateless people, and so on and so forth cannot have a bank account, not because they don't have the right to it. It's just how power dynamics are, and the banks have a lot of say beyond the law, and as one bank staff put it, we know it's against the law, but it's our policy. It's a direct quote from one of the staff, one of the stateless person that we interviewed. And so we have a long way to go, but the good news is that a lot of stateless people already find some solution, opening a crypto wallet. You can be your own bank. You don't have to keep the money under the mattress. Another area where we're finding solutions, archiving. So in places like Myanmar, the government is not just trying to physically erase the people and forcibly relocate them or displace them. Key thing is that they're also trying to go after the legal IDs of these people of the past. They're trying to destroy these documents because these documents serve as proof that these people have belonged in the past in the territory. And the Rohingya, for instance, so to cut the story short, in 1982, military junta takes over and they can make a list of acceptable ethnicities. 160 ethnicities make the list. I believe it's like 30 or 40 didn't make the list, and the Rohingya are the biggest group of them. And so it's of interest for the government to destroy the proof of the Rohingya that they have roots to the country, and those roots extend as far back as 400, 500 years. And so it's quite important that we now have decentralization and blockchain, and our partner up with Filecoin, for instance, so that the Rohingya can preserve their collective identity in a secure way beyond the reach of abusive governments. And of course, what's really of interest to us, strong interest to us, is the possibility of decentralized identification. So as I mentioned, none of us own our own proof of identity right now. We think it's a very good idea for everybody to have a plan B in case your own government is not going to be so nice in the future, whether by collapse of the regime or whether people voting for crazy businessmen who want to see the world burn. It doesn't matter. So we see that it's quite important to have that option. And the good news is that theoretically there's plenty of room for that development, but we already see that development, and there's already decentralization identification projects, but we find it very disturbing that a lot of these actors, blockchain actors, who do they go to when they want to partner up on their projects? They don't go to the people who stand to benefit the most from the technology. They like to go to the governments or the corporations and say like, hey, we want to do this project with you, and we already see a lot of harm coming out of that. in that it's a top-down approach that completely ignores the experience of people that it's supposed to help. And that's why it's quite important and I know I'm running out of time, that's why I'm trying to think like what I should really focus on. It's quite important, 2 points here. Like for blockchain technology to keep to its original philosophy of decentralization, because it's going to be very scary and very detrimental if centralized powers, authoritarian powers in particular, are able to get control of this technology to pursue their programs of discrimination and human rights violations. And we already see a lot of authoritarian governments getting into this game, and what that will mean for surveillance and with immutability and various aspects of blockchain technology, it will be quite disturbing. What the detrimental impact will be. So it's quite essential to talk to the affected people who are harmed by such practices, but it's also important to keep in mind that there needs to be a lot of stubborn dedication to the decentralized philosophy of blockchain, and I think I'll stop there with this point. Thank you very much. Time flew by really fast. Thank you for your attention.
Some questions?
First thing, I have a quick comment. Is that actually, the problem, some of the problems that you mentioned with the bank account, it doesn't happen only to people who are refugees, etc. Even if you're just a migrant, an expat, that has happened to me, that I cannot open a bank account in my own country. And supposedly I should be able to do it, but they don't let you. They don't say why. They see that your address is in another country and just they don't want to do it. Okay, my 2 questions. So first, it's a bit personal, but I wonder, can you travel? Do you have a European Union passport? And then the second one is, what do you recommend as a contingency, as a plan B, right? Should we try to get a second citizenship?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'll start at the end there. That's what a lot of rich people are doing already, right? If you have a lot of money, you have more options. So there's citizenship by investment programs. More than 100 countries in the world have migration by investment programs. But a lot of people can't afford it, and if you don't give the right to people like stateless people to work, or refugees or exiles and so on, they're not going to gather the money to buy their way out of that horrible situation they're in. But in terms of your question on how do I travel? So that's a funny thing, is that Latvia says that we basically have the same rights, but there's a big difference between how many countries that Latvian citizens can travel to and how many countries we can travel to. So Latvian citizens outside of the EU, well, we're EU natives, so it would be awkward for EU to not allow us to travel within the EU, but even there's a difference, because I'm not supposed to be outside of Latvia for more than 90 days. So ironically, I have to go out of EU to stop the ticker, or be in countries like, outside of Schengen area, or be in countries where I have certain residences, and luckily I'm one of the lucky ones that has residences, for the ticker to not work. So there's a big difference, but we're given, as you saw, the Latvian non-citizen passport. I got denied boarding, I am put in detention a lot, I'm harassed a lot, and people don't really understand, like, how can I have such strong roots in Latvia and be from Latvia, and my ancestors are from there, but I'm not given the same rights, right? So by fact, I'm a national, but legally I'm not. So, yeah, did I miss anything?
The passport is an EU passport?
The passport is EU passport, but it's a non-citizen, just like with American Samoans, yeah. Non-citizen, right? But that's not the biggest problem we have. The biggest problem is that they translated that terminology into English as alien passport, which is not in line with their own laws. Yeah. So, but that's to create difficulty for us. It would be a win-win-win for everybody if they would just stop, if they would actually fulfill their words, and we would have the same rights. But a lot of these things are not based on rational grounds, like discrimination, racism, xenophobia, ethnophobia. It's not rational things, right? So, yeah.
Thank you, Aleksejs.
Thank you.